G'day everyone. My name's Peter, and welcome to the first ever episode of Beyond the Call. It's a brand new podcast that I've decided to start up to discuss the occupations of high trauma occupations and the effects that they have, both current, past, and future. Um, a bit about myself. I am a 20-year veteran paramedic. I've been with the Queensland Ambulance Service for that time. Um, I'm currently off work with an injury, with a mental health injury, and I'll get into more of that later on. I'm married, been married for nearly 20 years, um, and I have two children. And this is coming to you from Townsville up in Queensland, Australia. And I want to thank anyone for taking the time to tune in, listening, see how this goes, and yeah, we'll go from there. So, um, so work-wise, just to give you a bit of background, I started my career as a student paramedic back in those days at Roma Street Station at in the heart of Brisbane, and it was an excellent place to learn to be a student. We were a relatively young group. Um, Had lots of fun. I was there for about 3 years in total, and still have very fond memories of the people I worked with, and a really good variation on the workload, and a great place to sort of consolidate your learning as you go through your student program. You get exposed to everything. There's not much I didn't see down there that I saw elsewhere, but yeah, it was a great place to be a student. Once I qualified, I actually went out to Emerald and went out bush, my version of bush at the time, and did an 8 week stint out there. And I remember at the end of that stint ringing the wife up, who's we had two young kids at that time, um, and saying to her, look, apart from the family, I really don't want to come home. I don't want to come home and work there anymore. Like, it was relentless. It was busy, 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 busy. And that was just the city life. It's funny, the quietest times at Roma Street back in the day when I was there was a Saturday day and a Sunday day, where we might even have time to go to South Bank and sit there and have a drink and watch the people, in between calls. Whereas pretty much any other time you were just flat out, and especially you can only imagine being one of the closer ones to Fortitude Valley, the high volume turnover and stuff that we had. um, so I did this stint in Emerald just before the floods. I actually got there the day before the floods, and it was the first time I'd been exposed to, I guess you could call it, rural work. I mean, it still had its hospital, and there was a reasonable amount. It was a 24-hour station still, so um, but I really liked the lifestyle of this smaller place. And I'd really only lived in Brisbane and Ipswich area growing up, and so when I was there, there was an opportunity came up for an acting officer in charge role, and I'd previously done some management experience at cinemas and that type of thing. So I just thought, put my put my hat in the ring, so to speak, and then I was lucky enough to get the gig. Never been to Barcaldine, didn't even really know where it was. So we took an acting OIC gig out there, and I remember I drove out there. Um, Sharon, my wife, had never left the city either, apart from a couple of overseas trips. She was definitely not a country girl, and so I drove up there, and then flew her and the girls up later on. And I remember I picked her up from Emerald, which is about a 3 hour drive to Barcaldine. And as we were getting out there, it was trees were getting sparser and sparser, and it was getting more and more remote, and there was tears coming down her eyes as you could just see in her face, what the hell am I getting into? And went to Barcaldine, and it was a very strange experience. It's a single officer station, and it was my first experience of being a single officer response. So you work an 8 on 6 off roster, which is pretty much most of the single officer stations in Queensland anyway, and I imagine it's very similar around the country. But I'm sure I'll be corrected there if that's the case. But as a single officer, it's yeah, it was really scary. It was really a terrifying time to know you didn't know what you didn't know, and yeah, all your training, especially when you work in the cities, and Roma Street's about as city as it gets. All your training is done with two people. It's done in groups. It's done, you've got these resources to do that. Call for critical care paramedic backup. Call for this. Call for that. Um, well, yeah, we didn't have it. Our closest backup were 100 kilometres or 110 kilometres, north, south, east, west type of thing. So yeah, it takes a while to get anyone there. So I remember, we had our phones and waiting for them. I would actually pick it up to make sure that somebody was there, because that it was still a dial tone, because I think I went the first 3 days without a job, and that's really disconcerting. It's really quite when you got used to doing multiple jobs a day. Um, well, very rarely being at station. It was a really really strange experience, and then you're on call overnight. So you do this. You do generally around an 8 till 6 in the station. And then you're on call overnight. And then if you get call outs through the night, then you may get a fatigue break, which just basically means you don't have to go to the office, but you're still on call. Um, and I started doing single officer OIC work in 2008, and I've continued that pretty much throughout my career, and that is my substantial role at the moment. So from Barcaldine, we went to Hewenden, which was north, a couple hours north. Again, it's about 4 hours inland of Townsville. And then I was there for close to 2 years, and then went down to a little town of Guru, which is about 55, 60 kilometres south of Townsville, and it's a little sugar town, small population, but a large geographic area. Still single officer, but your backup's not too far away, 25 minutes, in a hurry. But yeah, you could get some decent jobs going on, and yeah, it became more and more comfortable in that OIC role, and more comfortable in the single officer role. You're never 100% comfortable, because you don't know what the day's going to bring. Um, and that was something I loved about my role, is that you never knew what the day was going to do. And it was normally that sort of, oh, the more things you've got planned, the more likely you are to get a job. And a quiet weekend in Guru, or Hewenden for that matter, was a couple of jobs, one or two, three jobs, four jobs in an 8 day stint. So they could be really quiet, but that steadily picked up, and you know you could do up to 25 jobs in that 8 day stint, and anywhere up to you could do 22 hours non-stop, and yeah, it could be pretty fatiguing. Um, had some big jobs, and I'll go into some of those down the track. Um, while I was in Guru, I also managed to get a gig doing some acting, what we call SOS work, or Senior Operations Supervisor. I guess you'd call it like an operational duty manager. I think I've seen that called that in other jurisdictions. Um, and that was a job that I actually really enjoyed doing. I did that through for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years on and off throughout the year. Managed to learn a lot from that job. That was basically a job where you look after the live operational environment of the entire region. Which in Townsville case was going at one stage, it was out to sort of Mount Isa, but essentially it went out to Hewenden, Richmond, Hewenden area, down to between Ayr Aaron Bowen, and then up to as far as Cardwell. So geographically, quite a large area. Very limited resources within those areas. A lot of single officer stations, and yeah, it was always a matter of that job was about the what ifs and the big picture. It's and it could get quite demanding and quite hard. And then if big jobs goes on, then you may go down there as like an operational commander or whatever. Um, Also managed to be event commander for a couple of large events like Groove in the Moo, the supercars, that type of thing. So yeah, got some good experience and had some a lot of learning in a lot of those sort of jobs. So why have I started this podcast? And stick with me. I know this is a bit of the boring stuff, but this is why I've decided to do this. And the first thing I want to point out is that this is not going to be a political podcast. At the same time, there will be discussions about political or legislative change that I would like to see, but that's not pro one, pro the other. It is just that's the current legislation, and that's the stuff that I would like to get changed. And I'm sure there'll be varying opinions and varying inputs throughout the chats that I have. Um, I guess this podcast is part therapy, um, part interest. I've listened to other podcasts. A shout out to Damo and Schultze from Two Ordinary Coppers. They got me interested in this topic as well. They've got a great podcast. They're two ex Northern Territory coppers that have a nice yarn with each other and tell some great stories. And it gave me a bit of inspiration. My my psychologist actually recommended to me that I could write a book or tell my stories because it is part of the therapy that I am undergoing. It's an ongoing process, and yeah, and so and what's this podcast going to be about? Well, essentially, there are a lot of high trauma occupations out there. The most obvious ones that people think about are defence first personnel and emergency services or first responders, as they're called at some places. SES officers, rural fireys, corrections officers, but then there's ED nurses or intensive care nurses and doctors, and that and they're like um, NICUs, and there's a lot of people that see a lot of trauma, a lot of abnormal stuff, and a lot of stuff that you can't control. Um, so it can be it really is. There are a lot of stories to be told, and I'm trying to give people a chance to tell their story, and I want it to be about their past, their present, and what their future looks like because we're all different. And then there's a huge difference between rural work, remote work, and city work. I've been lucky enough to have done all of them. Um, they all have their advantages, they all have their disadvantages, they all have their inherent uh, costs, they all have their inherent risks. Excuse me. They all, they've definitely got their own challenges, and that's not just in numbers of people. It's the isolation and everything. So, hopefully, we'll have a good chat to people about that sort of thing. And yeah, um, so what's my story? So I was diagnosed with PTSD about 14 months ago. I haven't worked now for about 18 months. I'm currently on work cover and undergoing treatment for PTSD and anxiety depression. Um, how did that happen? Well, essentially, I got attacked while I was working as a single officer in a small community. Um, don't need to go too much into the details, but it was a situation where I genuinely feared for my life. as a single officer in the dark, 2 a.m. It was terrifying. Um, I didn't physically get injured, but yeah, it was a scary, scary experience. Um, and then I thought I was okay, and um, went back to work and went and saw a psychologist. Went back to work within the following week, and kept going, and then. Sure some people will remember the incident where unfortunately two Queensland police officers were killed near Oakey, near Toowoomba, and that was at the time, 2 weeks or so after my injury, and that really rattled me as well, and as a result, I went to work and things just weren't okay. I was emotional. I was just not right. I was not able to give my best to my patients. Had a busy couple of days at work. Went to some pretty a horrific job or two, um, and then yeah, it just didn't go well. And I remember driving home or driving back to station. I call it home because that's where I was staying when I was working. Driving back to station and just not being okay. And I rang my boss up and I said I'm not okay. And I got relieved later on that day. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to go back full time since. I've tried to do a return to work, and it hasn't gone to plan, unfortunately. Um, I didn't realise how bad I actually got at home. I think it was, there's as with all mental health, there's long delays for psychiatrists and that sort of thing. And initially, I wasn't seeing a psychiatrist, but over time, we sort of the family. We realised things weren't going too well, and I was getting quite low. So we made an appointment for a psychiatrist. I think that was maybe February, and the first available appointment was in August. Um, and and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was getting really depressed. I was anxious. I was isolating myself. I wasn't seeing my friends. If the phone would ring, I wouldn't answer it. Um, and it's funny, you then feel like you're just being ignored or isolated, but you don't realize that you're actually doing that to yourself. And that is one of it's a real symptom. But again, I had no idea. I was just in a rut, or so I thought. So I kept going down on a bit of a downward spiral. I was fortunate. I was never suicidal or down that track. Um, but I wasn't a happy person. I wasn't a good husband to be around. I wasn't a good father to be around. My kids noticed. I would, I was just shutting myself off from life. Like, yeah. Um, I didn't drink at home, but when I was drinking to get drunk if I went out. I was scared I didn't know who I was, when I wasn't working, that was my identity. And I found it a really, really hard, thing not to be working, and not to be a paramedic. I loved being a paramedic. So that's, yeah, the isolation and all that sort of stuff kicked in, and eventually it was Sharon that realised, my wife again, who realised that I really needed help, and I was on this downward spiral, and she eventually rang up. We're lucky enough up here to have a private mental health clinic, which is where my appointment was for, as an outpatient, but I needed I needed to go in, and I needed a circuit breaker. I was sleeping around 2 hours a night. I wasn't having nightmares as such, but I was waking up at 2 o'clock every morning. And it was only down the track. with the psychiatrist and through treatment that I actually realised that was the time I got attacked. And the brain can do some pretty bloody weird things. It's a scary but amazing organ. Um, and yeah, and I went. So I went into the psychiatric hospital for 2 weeks to initially mainly just a circuit breaker, and we got my sleep under control. Got some tried various medications to allow me to get past that 2 a.m. and yeah, it was a lot of trial and error, but it was the best thing that I've ever done for myself. Did a couple of day groups and stuff, and it's a pretty awkward thing to start with, but then you realise that most people there are pretty genuine people that have been hurt in one way or another, and yeah, obviously being up here, we're a defence town, so there was a lot of defence personnel in there as well. Um, and there was other first responders as well, and it was nice to be able to, some people weren't in a place to have conversations, and some people were. I'm someone who I like to talk about stuff. Um, it's funny, I can talk about stuff uh, without emotion. But yeah, it's getting into the nitty gritty of the emotions that I found quite hard. Um, so yeah, so I went back and I actually did a 4 week inpatient PTSD program or trauma program, and I think until like the first day I did that, I still didn't admit that I had PTSD. It just, I'm all right. I'll be okay. Been there, 18 years. So, I'm one of the lucky ones. I haven't got it. And then we were kind of going through the common symptoms of PTSD, and it was tick, tick, tick. Crap, I do have this. And initially, it's sort of like, damn, I do have this thing. And then it was more of a feeling of, well, at least what I'm feeling is normal, if that makes sense. I've got these emotions, and Everyone's got different signs and symptoms, but they're also quite similar. There's variations, but they're in similar sort of patterns and similar sort of thought processes, and yeah. And we spent the next 4 weeks going through this course, and it was really beneficial to me to learn how to just a bit of mindfulness, a bit of coping, a bit of pattern recognition, that type of thing. So it was the best thing that I'd ever done for myself. And I think if I hadn't done something like that, then yeah, I don't know where I'd be right now. So yeah, I did the inpatient PTSD course, and got a lot of benefit from that. It was really, yeah, it was, it's by no means a fix, but it gives you a starting point of where the future can go or be, and that you know, I even though I think you're always got a bit of PTSD if you've been diagnosed with it. The level can vary, and the level can your coping mechanisms and things like that can vary. And don't get me wrong, I have days where I don't want to get out of bed, and I have days where I feel pretty good, and they can be day after day or week after week. It does vary. Um, but without my family, I had a huge support network from my mum, my dad, my sister, and loved ones, and then you really get to find out who your mates are as well. The ones that when you don't answer the phone, or they ask you to go out and do the things you love to do. I'm a fisherman, love my fishing, but I didn't go fishing. And I would have a couple of mates in particular that asked me all the time if I wanted to go fishing, and I would just come up with a no for whatever reason the case may be. And and eventually a lot of people stopped calling. Um, but these guys didn't, and it was fantastic. And part of the and it's a recognized symptom of PTSD is that isolation, and you stop doing the things that you love doing. I don't, and it can be for a lot of reasons. It can be because you feel guilty. It can be because you just don't have the energy. It can be a lot of reasons why. But um, yeah, so even to this day, if if I'm having a bad trot, or I don't answer the phone a couple of times, eventually I'll get a message, or they'll just ring me and it'll be, "Oi, pick up the phone. It's not okay." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay, cool." And it's almost snaps me out of it. You really get to see who your friends are, and yeah, it's been quite an eye-opening experience, I guess, would be one of a a better term. So what do I do myself at the moment? Well, I do a bit of advocacy work. I volunteer with an organisation called Team Code Blue, who are based in Townsville, and I'm hoping to get its president on board and have a chat here. But essentially, it's run by some volunteers, and we essentially help first responders who are in crisis. Now, unfortunately, we've had to narrow down our version of first responder to just Queensland police, firefighters, and um, paramedics at the moment, simply because it's too broad and too expensive. It's purely a funding thing on who we can help. But essentially, we want to be there for first responders who are in crisis, and just give them a shoulder, and financial help, because often when you're going through this sort of thing, that financial hit that you take, a lot of people don't realise that when you go on work cover, you take a 25% hit to your back pocket. From your normal weekly earnings, you take 25% hit. Um, and that hurts, and that's a substantial amount of money for a lot of people. I don't know too many people that could just give away quarter of their wage and be comfortable, when you've got mortgages and families and things like that. So it can be pretty tough. So, yeah, so I do a bit of advocacy work with them. I still undergoing treatment, and yeah, I'm not sure what the future is. I really don't know. Yeah, and then my other advocacy work is sort of political, and that's basically I'm trying to get it changed. I want the legislation changed currently, with first responders, as well as many, most Queensland workplaces. But this is regarding specifically to first responders. Um, I'm a firm believer that first responders who are injured by their job should be entitled to something similar to the Veterans Gold Card, and a veterans pension. And unfortunately, that, as current legislation exists, does not happen. There is no pension. There is no gold card. You'll get your statutory payout. For those that don't know, with work cover, when you finish your work cover claim and you're deemed as stationary and what is it, stable and stationary, then they basically, you go to a tribunal, they give you a percentage of disability, which may be 10%, um, and you are offered a statutory amount. It's listed in legislation. It's currently about 386,000 for 100%. So you can imagine 10% would be about 38,000. So you're offered that amount, and then it's, if you want more than that, if your injury is under 20%, if you want more than that, then you are forced to take a common law claim, which obviously takes a long time, a lot of expense, and it's just not a thing to do. It's not a great thing to do. So yeah, it's a tough gig. So yeah, so I've been, writing to politicians and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that's basically what I've been doing lately. Um, and what am I looking to do with this podcast? Well, essentially, I'm looking at getting on some guests and discussing experiences. I'll discuss some of my stories and my experiences. There's going to be some sad stuff. There's going to be some funny stuff. There's going to be some horrific stuff. It's it can be a bit all over the place. I'm going to try and keep most of my podcast to around that half an hour, so just nice and quick and easy. Um, and if it goes, if a guest comes on and or if I'm rabbiting on too much, we'll split it into two episodes, and that way, yeah. So yeah, Beyond the Call is the name of my podcast, and I appreciate everyone uh, yeah, listening in, giving me your time. I hope this is something that people enjoy. It is my first time. I've never been on a podcast or part of a podcast yet. And yeah, I just want to basically answer people's questions and that type of thing. So eventually I'll have everything set up where it'll have its own podcast and podcast web address and all that sort of thing. And I'll give you an email address. I'll set something up, and then yeah, I'd love anyone's feedback, suggestions, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, until next time, yeah, stay safe and be kind.